Hey guys, Tommy Kerrigan with Tommy Untamed. We've got a great show coming up. Thank you for watching. But what we were just jumping off on, which is, I think, a fairly rational middle ground conversation, which of course means that we'll be burned at the stake for not taking a side on either end of the radical sea. Hey, let's have a middle ground. We're going to be truly just burn on fire like a 1500s astronomer. But that there's a middle ground. You can look at something like the mRNA vaccine, how it was used thus far, and say, yeah, it probably wasn't good. It was certainly unethical with informed consent and coercion. But that also doesn't mean like there's grift in the military industrial complex. Everyone knows that. I also don't think we should just dissolve the DoD because I'm also not naive. I'm also like, you gotta have tanks. And I don't know, maybe the middle ground is you realize that there is, Tammany Hall used to call it an honest grift. You can protect, he goes, you can protect America and put a little bit in your pocket. I'm like, maybe that is it. But about that is like, you can't throw it all out. Like, not every vaccine is bad. You can't do that. And of course, if you say that now, it's, oh, you're a Trojan horse or you're muddying the waters, because any sort of reasonable conversation puts a target on your back that you are a heretic. So, I mean, I figure if not for this show, one of our other shows, you and I will eventually be lit on fire together, and I imagine some sort of town square. But until that beautiful day, Dr. Malone, I'm going to hand it over to you as you were just telling me about your newest Substack.
So the piece that I'm writing right now is very much influenced by what I've been seeing in the context of the West Texas measles outbreak. Now, just to recap, we of course had a massive psyop around that, promoting the safe and effective narrative without qualification around COVID. And the whole narrative that these genetic therapy-based vaccines using adenovirus vectors and mRNA cationic lipid complexes are just like any other vaccine. And they're truly safe and effective, and you should not question that, because if you question it, then you would cause vaccine hesitancy, and vaccine hesitancy would kill people largely through the belief that we would not be able to achieve herd immunity as a population if we didn't have virtually universal uptake of these products. Now, that turned out to be a false narrative because the products are not that effective, setting aside whether or not they're safe. And the data now demonstrate not only could those products never have allowed a population to achieve herd immunity in the face of the infectivity of the more recent SARS-CoV-2 viruses, which are extremely infective, almost as infective as measles. So even if we had 95% uptake, and these were highly effective vaccine products, we still could not have achieved herd immunity, despite what Tony Fauci said in his kind of sliding scale. The data show, if you actually get in and do the calculations, that with these vaccines, even with the most optimistic claims of their effectiveness at preventing infection, you would have had to have something like 120 to 130% uptake. Now, that's statistically not possible, but it's an artifact of how the calculation is done about herd immunity. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough in terms of the um, misrepresentation of truth on the part of various officials, then the Cleveland Clinic came out with their internal study of vaccine effectiveness with these products that showed that at some period of time after accepting the product, you developed what was called negative effectiveness. And that's a fancy vaccine and pharmaceutical talk for you actually become more likely to develop the infection and disease than if you never accepted the vaccine in the first place. And the reason for that is still under debate. So fast forward, then we had, of course, Peter Hotez notoriously saying right before the election of President Trump that beginning strangely with the day of his confirmation as president, he could expect to see a series of infectious disease outbreaks that he and his administration would have to address. Peter apparently has prescient ability to predict the future uh, because then coincident essentially with the confirmation of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of HHS. And just to put a pin in that, HHS is the largest department in terms of budget in the entire federal government, exceeding the U.S. Department of Defense. So Bobby now has direct oversight for the biggest chunk of the federal budget in terms of all other departments. And coincident with his uh, confirmation, which was delayed by various senators, there was an outbreak of measles in a Mennonite community that does not accept childhood vaccines, does not accept the MMR vaccines in West Texas. A little bit of context. West Texas, in terms of, let's say, medical practice and competence, is, I'll say this gently, a bit of a backwater.
Desert,
Uh,
right? I mean, it's like a medical desert.
that's one way to phrase it. There are hospital facilities, but it is not. If you're a um, very good physician or a coming out of medical school, you're seeking a residency. That is considered to be that region and those hospitals are considered to be how do I say um, last option.
And
Uh,
and for what you're saying, sorry to interrupt, and for people listening there, I might think, well, what are you talking about? No, I remember that being an exact. I went to Valdosta State for 2 years, which is in the deep south. Then I went to the University of Georgia, which is a little bit of a bigger school, but they kind of said all the same lines. There's apply to the big schools, but then it's like there are smaller rural schools, and they just kind of set up what it is. It's like ideally you're gonna go get the thing at Emory. If you're not as hot of a student, you can go to one of these schools, and they're willing to take you because it's better than nothing. So it is a fact
yeah.
of life, and
So
you don't have to like
it's a
it, but it's
backwater.
yeah.
And unfortunately, this Mennonite community has had to rely on this uh, um, non-superior medical community to manage as the hospital source for managing their measles outbreak. Now, measles outbreaks are relatively common. There is a larger outbreak currently burning in Ontario, Canada. And the European region, as designated by the WHO, had a record number of measles cases last year, something like 1,200 or a couple thousand. And measles outbreaks kind of come in two flavors. One is wild type measles, very much like polio. But the measles vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine, which means not that it was produced through gain of function, but it was produced in the 60s, early 60s, by a guy named Maurice Hilleman at Merck through the use of a technology called serial passage, in which you culture the measles virus in laboratory conditions and it gradually evolves to adapt to those laboratory conditions. And then if it's used to infect humans, it doesn't do so very well. Uh, and this is not the product of genetic engineering. This is more like old school animal breeding. And one of the problems with that, with both the live attenuated polio vaccine and the live attenuated measles vaccine, is occasionally, because they replicate in your body when you accept those vaccines, occasionally as those vaccines are replicating, they acquire new mutations that makes it easier for them to infect humans. And as I'll document in the Substack from peer-reviewed literature, it's widely known that even if you don't have a viral reversion in your measles vaccine after accepting it, you still shed measles virus, vaccine virus, that can potentially infect others. Okay. So this is just the um, inconvenient truth. And some fraction of measles worldwide these days, just like now increasingly the data are suggesting the majority of polio cases worldwide are not due to wild type polio or wild type measles, but increasingly they're due to reversions of the live attenuated vaccine. Okay, so there is vaccine associated measles and there's wild type measles. The vaccine associated measles tends to be milder, tends to be less infectious, but it still happens. That's the truth. So in this, furthermore, that those that receive the measles vaccine as a child, at some point in their life, well, even after accepting it, it is not a perfect vaccine. There are no perfect vaccines. And some people that get exposed to measles virus during an outbreak will develop disease even though they've been vaccinated. So you again, there's another split. You have the vaccinated that get measles and the unvaccinated that get measles. And generally speaking, the vaccinated ones get measles less frequently than the unvaccinated ones. Measles, again, is insanely infectious. Uh, but also, the truth is that, particularly in children, measles infection is generally not lethal. Children recover. You'll recall the famous Brady Bunch video clip that circulated on the internet where the Brady Bunch is talking about having a measles party
Hmm.
because somebody in their network has become infected with measles, just the same as children used to have
Chickenpox.
chickenpox parties where their parents would take them when timing was right to the house of some child and allow them to play with that child that had an active case of chickenpox so that they would become infected. So, in this current West Texas outbreak, there have been two cases of, they're both young girls from this Mennonite community that have died. And the press has latched onto this, that in both cases, these were measles deaths. NPR, New York Times, all the usual outlets are all busy trumpeting that these were measles deaths. And furthermore, right after Bobby was confirmed, the narrative was being promoted that this was his fault in some way because he was an anti-vaxxer that had been discouraging people from getting vaccines. There's absolutely no evidence that the Mennonite community in West Texas was influenced in any way by Bobby Kennedy and Children's Health Defense. They have fundamental uh, um, reasons for not accepting vaccines, like the Amish community does too, in general. They just don't accept vaccines. They don't believe in it. Uh, and for their own reasons. But this was weaponized in corporate media, that this was an example of the problem with Trump appointing Bobby Kennedy to run HHS, that now we were going to see HHS suppressing vaccines, and this would lead to excess vaccine preventable deaths. And these two unfortunate young girls were examples of that kind of consequence that we might see now all across the United States and the world, of course. Uh, we had concurrent, the WHO declaring that there was a travel advisory against traveling to the United States because of measles. historically, the United States had been designated as being measles free over the last few years, unlike Europe, unlike Canada, unlike Mexico, unlike Latin America. But the WHO didn't put out any public health announcement or travel advisory for any of those countries, only for the United States. Now, that just, I'm sure it's a pure circumstance, was concurrent with Trump withdrawing money from the WHO. There is clearly the appearance of a political agenda and a conflict of interest here, whether or not
Nonsense.
that's the case.
Never, not in medicine. Never, ever.
Never, never. So then, then this narrative that was being so actively promoted but was clearly false. There's no way that you can make the case that Bobby Kennedy was responsible for Mennonite decisions to not accept childhood vaccines. And the ugly truth underlying all this is the answer to the question, how did measles get introduced into the Mennonite community in West Texas? And the history has been that when you have secure borders, like happens in Taiwan, and you have an effective, largely effective vaccine program implemented, as we do here in the United States. You know, the Mennonites are an exception, and the Mennonites basically benefit from the protection afforded by other people outside of the Mennonite community in Texas having accepted childhood measles vaccine. That's the truth. Okay, so they've been an island functionally protected because others around them are protected. And in the case of secure borders like they have at Taiwan, history has demonstrated, this is, by the way, this is argument in favor of travel restrictions. In the case of Taiwan, almost all measles cases are imported. And that's the case in the United States. In other words, it's folks coming from non-measles vaccinated countries. You know, this is a surrogate for hint, hint, wink, wink, undocumented aliens coming up through the southern border into Texas in importing measles. So if you want to make a case about who would be responsible for this particular outbreak, and you were an unbiased corporate media reporter, I'm being very gentle here. The much stronger case would be that this could be attributed to the Biden administration open border policies, not Bobby Kennedy's past history of questioning vaccine safety. Uh, so, in the face of all this, the I was given a tip-off. Uh, first, first in the first case, Children's Health Defense, which Bobby Kennedy used to be the chairman of the board for, was able to obtain the medical records of the first child that was purported by media to have died from measles, the hospitalization records. And those review of those actual documents, the hospitalization records, revealed that what actually happened with this initial young girl, and by the way, the families of the two young girls that have died both know each other because they're both part of this Mennonite community. So in the case of the first young girl, examination of the medical records demonstrates that the physicians managing the case in a West Texas pediatric hospital assumed that her pneumonia was due to measles. Measles does cause a viral pneumonia. And they treated the case as if this was a measles pneumonia in an unvaccinated child. And she was unvaccinated. But in fact, what she died of was not measles pneumonia. It was mycoplasma pneumonia. So in the, which is, you could think of it as a form of a bacteria, particular subcategory bacteria. Mycoplasma is the most common cause of walking pneumonia in all of us, including you and me. Uh, so that was a case where the physicians appeared to have accepted this dominant narrative that what was going on here was a community of people that were non-compliant with standard of care measles vaccine uptake, that had had an outbreak, and in a sense, it was their fault. And furthermore, children that developed pneumonia within this community, um, if they had any signs or symptoms of measles, the assumption should be that they had measles pneumonia, and you don't start looking for other explanations. In other words, you don't do a differential diagnosis. You're so biased that this is measles pneumonia that you don't go any further in looking for other potential causes. And that happened apparently in the case of the first patient. So then recently, a couple of weeks ago, another young girl died in the same hospital, from the same community, previously unvaccinated. And once again, her medical records were provided by the family to Children's Health Defense. And once again, Dr. Pierre Corey reviewed those medical records. Concurrently, I got a tip off, even before Pierre and the medical records were released. I got a tip off that this second case of measles that was likely to be considered to be a measles death in West Texas was not, in fact, a measles death, and that I should talk to the physician who treated the family, not the hospitalization physicians, but rather the primary care physician. And so I called up this gentleman, and he dictated to me his clinical record of what he believed had taken place and what the findings were that he thought were seminal in this case. And they were that essentially this child had died of a bacterial pneumonia and sepsis. And in digging further into the case, it turns out that first the child historically went to a different hospital, and even more of a backwater hospital. And they saw evidence of a growing pneumonia at the bottom of her lung. And they put her on antibiotics for a day. It started to get better, so she showed clinical response. And they discharged her the next day without continuing the antibiotics. She got worse. Then she went into the um, more academic, in theory, higher powered children's hospital in West Texas. They admitted her, treated her with some antibiotics, not antibiotics that were directed against the true bug that she was suffering from, that she had acquired prior to the first overnight hospitalization and had been partially treated with. And she responded to those antibiotics, and they discharged her. Uh, then she came back. She got worse. She came back a few days later, and she had thrush, which is to say that she had a yeast infection in her mouth. The primary care physician indicates that she'd had a chronic problem with tonsillitis, and she was scheduled for tonsillectomy. Uh, so they treated her um, in this first admission in the children's hospital, discharged her. She crumped. She came in a couple of days later. They admitted her again and continued to assume that she had measles pneumonia. But then the culture results came in a few days later, as she was dying. And the culture results revealed that she had a multi-drug resistant E. coli infection that she probably acquired in that hospital during a prior administration, because that stuff is not circulating in general.
Hmm.
That's a classic example of a hospital acquired
MRSA or
E.
something.
coli infection. So um, once again, they had failed to recognize that this was bacterial. She had become septic. She had basically, her lungs had filled up with pus from this E. coli infection, and she passed away. And the press, New York Times, NPR, dutifully reported this as a measles infection. Now, she had in fact developed measles, and it first presented in the prior children's hospitalization, during the prior children's hospitalization event. So, and she seemed to have recovered from that rash before they discharged her. So the thesis was she died, and this is what was circulated in the press, and the hospital repeated it. The hospital put out the press releases that this was a death due to measles, and all the reporters dutifully reported it as such because that would all fit their narrative. But in fact, it wasn't. It was a case of medical misdiagnosis and mismanagement that resulted in an unnecessary death, number two, of a young girl from this Mennonite community that had developed a bacterial pneumonia. And that's where we are right now. I got Trial Site News to look into this. I was called by a reporter from West Texas who bought the whole storyline from the hospital hook, line, and sinker. That, well, this is what the hospital said happened. How come you reported otherwise? And I said, well, because I talked to the actual physician that was managing it. And why don't you look at the report from Pierre Corey, who's now reviewed the medical records? I don't think that article ever came out from that West Texas reporter, but it was fascinating listening to her because she was really resistant to the idea that they ought to do actual investigative journalism and question whether or not this hospital was accurately reporting that this was a measles death, or were they basically covering up the fact that they had a potential medical mismanagement lawsuit that they were facing because of the misdiagnosis and mismanagement, and that in fact there was no death certificate. The hospital was saying that this was death from measles, but in fact there was no documentation or final decision that this was death from measles. This was just a CYA. And what this illustrates is that we're in an environment where this dominant narrative about vaccines is so widely accepted and reinforced that it biases how journalists can hear information, how they process it, how physicians hear and process information. And of course, the counter narrative is no vaccine is safe and effective. And if, as you were mentioning in the lead in, if you or I question that, then we are controlled opposition. We're the bad guys. We've been subverted by the dominant paradigm. But the truth is, there's an intermediate. And I'm going to cite another in the article. I'm going to cite another post that was put out on X about another case of measles that occurred in a young girl, where the parents insisted that the virus that the girl was shedding get sequenced. And it turns out that that is a case, because she was vaccinated, that is a case of a young girl developing a measles vaccine strain related disease. And the physician who was managing it refused to say so, despite the evidence. Uh, he would not go there, which illustrates all of the pressure that docs are under right now. They will self-censor. They won't actually talk about what's going on because of fear of losing their license or other kinds of retaliation, losing their jobs. And in the face of all this, there's a middle way, which is to acknowledge that all vaccines, like all drugs, have side effects. And what really matters is, are the side effects worse than the disease, or are they less frequent and less um, impactful? Uh, and furthermore, do individuals have the right to make a decision about whether or not they accept vaccines for themselves or their children? Or does the state have the right to mandate that they do this? And that, I think, is what all this boils down to. All the propaganda and everything else. And yeah, there's a whole lot of conflicts of interest, and the medical specialty groups all get paid by Big Pharma, and Big Pharma has a vested stake in these incredibly profitable vaccine enterprises. They're protected from liability. They have big purchases from the government for the Vaccines for Children program. There's all this stuff is all true, but somewhere in the middle, there's the real truth, as opposed to these, as you put it, you referred to this basically as a religion, or I call it a cult. You have two cults. You have a cult of vaccines, and you have a cult of anti-vaccines. And both of them will not talk to the other. Both of them reject any facts which support the position of their opponent. And both of them will attack anybody that's in the middle that says, hey, let's just get the facts and let's make data-based decisions on whether or not these products make sense or don't make sense. And let's have a discussion about the rights of the individual versus the rights of the state to impose medical treatments on people and their children. Because that, I think, is a big one.
And most peculiarly, can't say that word, both think that there's only one cult.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, what's most fascinating, is they can see the other cult. Neither of them, they're on one side of the stadium looking at the other side of the stadium. They're like, look at all those idiots wearing the same jersey.
Yeah.
It's like, hey man, and neither of them, they can't or won't see their own, which is
Yeah.
just wild.
Well, it is cult. It's cult behavior. That's what we're in. And I think, Tommy, that if you step back, let's go up to 40,000 feet and look down. What we have is a situation in which everything in the United States in political discourse has been weaponized, and people are driven into two extreme camps, and they just shoot at each other, across the front lines. This is like World War I trench warfare. And just like in World War I trench warfare, the people that die are the ones that are on the other side of the battle line, shooting at each other and lobbing shells and gas and everything else. And they're not able to have a rational discussion that's fact-based.
I think
And I think this goes all the way through our politics now. Everything has become weaponized like this and polarized, and it's what's behind our inability to come up with common sense solutions.
not to shamelessly plug your book, but I mean the psyops are. I think the most incredible one to me, accepting that we already the whole COVID, we already saw all that. Since then, is the physical attacking of Tesla vehicles.
Yeah,
I get all the arguments of, well, he already bought that. I'm not even diving. Of course, it's ridiculous. I'm not even going into all that though. I think it's impressive that you have these people who presumably don't have criminal. A lot of them just seem like normal, kind of like milk toast, like just dude with a job. Like none of them seem to be like homeless, methamphetamine addled. They don't seem to have a criminal background. They don't seem like contract assassins. They seem like random people that would work at a CVS or a Target. Getting the download, and then physically, it's one thing if you're kind of brainwashed and you just retweet stuff and you stay in your silo. It is an insane step to get the download and then physically attack property, regardless of what it is, regardless of all the,
Everything from keying the side of a Tesla to throwing Molotov cocktails into a car dealership.
it is. So when you see that capability, because it's a capability, but by the people orchestrating it, it's like if a huge artillery barrage comes in World War One. Like if 100 shells hit, then like you're not that surprised. If like yeah, well they're probably also capable of throwing one shell. If they can do this, then yeah, I bet they're pretty good at brainwashing people. Like this is the absolute upper crust of their work, getting people to go out and physically do attack objects with built-in surveillance systems. That is the like tip of the spear, which means if they're
Yeah.
doing that, then yeah, they're probably subverting your own rational, like I don't know, empirical problem solving skills, the ability to look at things without a bias, or even the attempt to. That's the other thing, is like the attempt. Like I know no matter what I do, I will have a bias, but to try to at least be honest with yourself about that and go, I probably don't criticize Trump as much as I should, and I can try to, but I should deep down know that this is my side of the aisle, and I'm not going to go about it completely honestly. I just have to be honest with myself about that. And even if I think I'm being,
Tommy,
yeah,
Tommy, did you listen to Bill Maher's post mortem on his dinner with Donald Trump?
no, but I did see that he printed out all the insults Trump called him and got Trump to autograph it.
Precisely.
That's hilarious.
Um, but so I recommend to you and your viewers listen to what Bill Maher broadcast after he had that dinner, and it's really illuminating. He basically comes to the conclusion that Donald Trump listened very carefully to him, didn't judge him, uh, and that he genuinely liked the guy. And then Donald Trump, in the following day, went on some rant, and Bill Maher said, basically paraphrasing, the Donald Trump that I experienced over dinner and the Donald Trump that I saw through corporate media were two different people, completely different behaviors.
I've heard that from people who have like talked to President Trump privately.
So I've got a hypothesis about this. I think Donald Trump is a master of neurolinguistic programming.
Yeah,
I think Donald Trump has learned remember, he is all focused on the art of the deal, on convincing other persons to go along with whatever it is that he is proposing as business deal. I think he has become very adroit at active listening, at focusing, because if you listen to Bill Maher, he said that it's as if he was the only person in the room, that the president was totally focused on him, got what he was saying, listening carefully, et cetera, et cetera. And like you, I hear this story again and again from different people about Donald Trump. I think Trump, one of his superpowers, his secret weapons, is that he's learned the skill set for being able to absolutely focus on an individual and convince that individual that they are the most important thing in Trump's life at that particular moment in time. Whether or not that's true, it is absolutely a strategy. It's the strategy that Tony Robbins teaches, by the way, in his coursework.
I know people have
This
said that about
is
Bill
that this
Clinton.
is neurolinguistic programming. This is part of that toolkit of convincing a third party that you are on their side, that you are their friend, that you can be trusted, all those things. I think that that is part of Trump's superpower.
Heaven's Harvest prepper food, 72 servings per pail, 25-year shelf life. I've had the owner Clayton on the show before. He's a God-fearing, America-loving patriot. Get one of these, get a couple of them, throw them in your basement. It's good to have it, not need it, than to need it and not have it. If you don't want to do that, you can get their seeds. You can plant your own garden, so you don't even have to keep buying them. You can just get the goods and start your own, or you can even get freeze-dried fruits and vegetables like bananas, apples, strawberries, and raspberries. They support the show. It's an honest product. It's a good safety measure to have, and they keep my show free for you. So I'd implore you guys to please go to heavensharvest.com, use the link in the description, promo code TPC. Axios Fitness Coaching is a premium resource for holistic strength and conditioning services. Axios is best known for the Training Club, capital T, capital C, an exclusive community that prioritizes accountability, technique, diet, and nutrition. Everything you need to do to take action against the decay of the modern world. Whether you're looking to improve your physique, build strength, or just take care of your health and fitness, Axios will provide you with a solution that is effective and simple to execute. All you need to do is complete the intake survey, and you can see if you're a good candidate for the training club or any other of the services. And it's going to sponsor the show. So, one company falls off, another one arises. So if you guys like the show, you want to work out, throw the show a couple shekels. Go take the survey. Thank you so much, guys.
Higher ultraviolet exposure is associated with lower mortality. The United Kingdom is a high latitude and low sunlight country. Researchers there collected data on over 360,000 participants in a study of UV exposure via solarium use. When compared with non-users, solarium users had 15% risk lowered of all-cause mortality, 23% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality, 14% lower risk of cancer mortality, and a 12% lower risk of non-cardiovascular, non-cancer mortality. In other words, all other causes. Quoting the researchers, our study adds to the growing evidence that the benefits of UV exposure outweigh the risks in low sunlight environments. A link to the original publication is available in the box below the video. Get some UV light this winter. Immerse yourself in the tranquility of the blue. Visit a Blue Room soon. www.blueroom.com.
I know several people who have met with them privately at different times in the last 10 years. And they all talk about if you couldn't see his face and hear his voice, you would have thought the person talking was some general or something. Just completely tactical, but no, very eloquent way of speaking. And then you see him go on, and it's not just there's the person you see on camera, there's the person you see off camera. That goes for every human in the world. That there's a difference. They're like, no, it sounds like he's intentionally halving his IQ, which is kind of incredible to think about.
I think there's merit to that. I think that he is deploying a persona in his public communication that is specifically designed to reach a general population. And whether you want to call it dumbed down or smarted up, he is a master at controlling his communication in order to effectively elicit the response that he seeks.
Which is something you would have to do. I mean, if you're just I don't know, looking at the landscape of psychological warfare, and I mean, it really is almost entirely. I mean, it's the internet. That is the DMZ. That is the no man's land. That is where it's all happening live, and it's about crafting narratives and shaping narratives. If you're going to go out to dominate that world, you would have to adapt. No different than, when the biosphere shifts, radically over the course of 1,000 years or something, and the animals adapt. It's like, what do you got? Can you change? That is no, whatever this was, that's no longer the best thing. Now you got to be this. That's what you would do, I imagine. Now I'm not sure
Yeah.
if the spray tan's part of that, or if it's just if that's a personal thing. But that's what you would do, though, is just be loud, be simple, be comically simple. This is the best news ever. It's people are saying that's what you would do. Is I mean, what goes viral on Twitter? Some it's never some measured discussion about how can we, you know, organize society in a benefit. It's it's some cop rocking some drunk woman at a Waffle House. Like that's what takes
Yeah.
off.
This particular podcast episode could would be a lot more effective if your goal is to get clicks, likes, and views. If we would both start saying radical, crazy stuff,
Yeah.
um, uh, and that, by the way, that opens a whole nother uh, can of worms. Um, I had this. I don't think we've talked about it. I had the pleasure and honor of being on Tim Pool's podcast a few weeks ago.
Oh, really? No, I didn't know that.
And we talked about health and Maha, Del Bigtree was there. We talked about all that kind of stuff. Uh, and then afterwards, off camera, he started talking about what he sees as really going on in social media right now and the trends. And I keep trying to get him to get me back on his podcast to talk about that stuff because I thought that was way more interesting than talking about glyphosate
Yeah.
and food dyes.
Yeah.
So one of the, is so let's take the case of Candace Owens. Candace Owens has functionally delegitimized herself because of the increasingly radical positions she's taken in large part regarding the Gaza conflict and the Israeli Defense Force and the Palestinians, etc. Okay. Poole's thesis is that Candace and others are being actively manipulated by bot armies so that when this let's take Candace out of the loop and just talk about a exemplar social influencer. And if that social influencer says something that is along the spectrum of the IDF is guilty of human rights atrocities in Gaza. Okay, now that's if you look at that, I think that is fact-based. There is evidence of human rights atrocities associated with the Israeli Defense Force in Gaza. Human rights atrocity is in the eye of the beholder, but there it is. And then, so this hypothetical social media influencer suddenly goes from 10,000 likes to 100,000 likes. And suddenly their social media feed is filled with people saying, oh, thank heavens, somebody finally said it. And the Zionists are in control and blah, blah, blah. I mean, all you got to do is go on Gab and look up Zionist and you'll get an earful of it. Okay. So I don't have to express it. So suddenly you're this influencer and you get hit with all of these likes and reposts. And your conclusion is, I said something really important.
I hit a nerve.
I said something that represents a feeling, a belief that a lot of my followers have. So what do? Well, because if you're not centered in your own soul and your own heart, and what your real driver is to get more clicks, likes, and followers, next thing you do is you make another statement that's similar, perhaps a little more radical. And then suddenly it blows up on you. Yes, oh, absolutely. Yes, sir. That's we all agree on that. And this is all being done through weaponization of bots. It's active campaign, and that's Poole's thesis, is that this is being used to drive key influencers towards extreme positions so that they eventually delegitimize. They take positions that are so extreme that they're no longer allowed to be part of the national discourse. They will get, even on X, they will get deplatformed. let alone on Facebook, right? And so, and they'll get, in the case of Candace, for instance, they'll lose their organizational affiliation. They'll be blacklisted functionally, and suddenly find themselves ostracized, even within the dissident community, because they've gone too far. But they went too far because of this weaponization of bots and trolls, paradoxically not attacking them, but liking them, liking their more extreme statements, which drives them into even more extremism. I think this was a brilliant insight.
Oh,
And the other thing that he talked about that is really troubling to me is that he is convinced that there is an ongoing campaign in the face of, I think the term that's now used is earned media. The fact that the Donald Trump campaign and the Republican Party were able to outgun the Democrats in earned media, which is to say they got a lot more coverage through Joe Rogan and others than the Democrats did. You know, we can argue that Kamala Harris blew it with her position with Joe Rogan, but the upshot is the Republicans got more earned media as a euphemism for free stuff than the Democrats did, and that may well have swayed the election. And so now the Democrat Party, apparently, and the progressives believe they've got to do something about it. There's too many, and you know, let's just park the fact that Joe Rogan used to be coming from the left.
Yeah.
Just like Bobby Kennedy used to be coming from the left. And he's been, one version of the narrative is that the left has abandoned him and run to the hard left, and that's left him in the center, relatively speaking. But however you want to frame it, Joe Rogan is now portrayed as being far right. And the left has lost, just like they lost Bobby, they have lost a lot of their former traction in earned media and social media. And so what they're doing surreptitiously, according to Tim Pool, this is his hypothesis, and I see evidence supporting it, is that the social media platforms have all kind of gotten sneaky. It's not that Facebook has had a profound conversion, let alone Google, to an advocate for free speech, but rather they've kind of gone underground, just like Twitter/X under their current CEO, Yacarino, I think is her name, has endorsed, and Elon Musk endorsed to the European Union, the idea of freedom of speech, but not of reach. So what that translates to is a strategy called small rooming. So your podcast, or mine, or ours together, is only allowed to be seen by our most avid followers. Even though we may have a much larger, I just passed 1.3 million followers. Yay! But many of those will report that they never see my posts.
Yeah, no, it's
because I'm being small roomed. And so what they allow is for us to circulate our information content within a prescribed region, our most avid followers. It's not able to break out unless, something goes viral that breaks us out of that small room. And the left now is promoting new influencers, alternatives to Joe Rogan. And in some cases, they're starting to exceed Joe Rogan's audience share, according to Tim Pool. And they're doing this by making it so that these people don't get small roomed. They have wide reach and they're able to be promoted. Whereas the likes of you and I are constrained within our small boxes of most avid followers and aren't able to break out to the general population. And so that they build the following and the legitimacy of these left-wing or progressive social media influencers while preventing the center-right or far-right from growing their audiences. That, to me, it rings true. It's consistent with what I observe. And it indicates that we're fooling ourselves into thinking that Mark Zuckerberg has had an epiphany, or let alone Sergey Brin and Google. And to that extent, there's a recent survey from Robert Epstein in his group, not Epstein, right? They're the ones that do the analysis of Google surreptitious influence through a selection of what media we all are able to see on Google when we go on Google. And they've demonstrated that to an extreme, all of the media, this loops back to your Tesla observation, all of the media that Google is allowing people to encounter relating to Doge is negative. Google is actively torpedoing the Department of Government Efficiency through selecting what information viewers are able to see concerning Doge. And so, as you point out, they're all being functionally hypnotized and trained to have these kind of rabid positions because of the manipulation of information by Google. We have the smoking gun. We have the data to demonstrate that that's what's going on.
The small rooming is brilliant because it's a lot better than censoring. You censor someone, you make them sexy. You also make that person radical. Versus you give them a room and let them talk. They a little less fear. Coming from my own experience, a
Yes.
little less fierce. If YouTube just
Yeah.
culled my audience, I'd probably still be on there. Probably be a very small show. But because they pushed me off, I kind of just went insane and was like, through hell or high water, I'm gonna beat them. But it's a much better way to kind of judo it into a small room. Thinking about and you hit the like what the antidote to it is you have to just be true to yourself and your own soul. Like if you do that, if you have your own true compass, you're gonna be fine. You gotta just go true north. But if you're not, and you base your thing on what the audience is saying, which I don't read comments, I don't read chat, I don't care. I've always done what I think are good episodes and what I think is interesting, what I think is right. If I had listened to that, I would have shut the show down after, the first COVID episode. But people that are kind of in that upper echelon of podcast, million subscribers plus, they are wildly, if not entirely, kind of reactionary to just the number of live viewers, the number of clicks, the revenue. And thinking about, well, what is the value of doing that? The value in doing that, if I'm just looking at it from like a national security apparatus, not in a noble sense, but like the intelligence community, and we look at things like Mockingbird, and we look at things like the Twitter files, and now know that the DHS and the FBI had back portals into Instagram and Facebook, and the Global Engagement Center, the GEC, which I think we've talked about. What you would want to do is if you see these, so like what's like the value of someone like Rogan other than just reach? The fact that if you listen to him, if you've just never listened to him, you go, I'm going to listen to the far right guy. You can't be dishonest with yourself when you go, oh, he seems like a pretty normal dude. And then so when you start like listening to people that are pretty normal dudes, and you go, well, they told me this guy's a Nazi, or even on the left, they told me this guy was a commie. And you listen to him, you go, no, that just kind of seems like a left of center guy. It gives them value. So when they do have someone on, just whoever, let's say, Rogan or I don't know, whoever's on the left, let's say Bill Maher or someone, and you go, oh, that guy kind of seems reasonable, decent. When they have someone on who is maybe talking about things that the government doesn't want talked about, however much money we're sending to Ukraine or Israel or what we're doing on the borders, you take it a little more seriously. You see it on the news, you go, that's all propaganda. But if you see someone on a road, you go, well, that's a pretty decent person. If you are in the intelligence community, and by the way, none of this is objectively good. This is all evil, but just to put myself in their mind, you go, we have to taint them. You can't have these people look like reasonable people. What
Yeah.
you would do is you'd find the ones who have kind of hoard themselves out to they just pursue audience numbers. And what you would do is you try to push them off the straight and narrow. They're doing the field sobriety test, and you just kind of nudge them, and then the public are the cops. And you go, "Did you see him? Oh, he's tripping." And then when you see Rogan has on someone, you go, "I'm not. I heard that guy ranting about the Jews," and you discard it. If you're in the intelligence community,
It's a win.
it's a brilliant move, because straight up censorship doesn't work. We saw that in 2020. It does not work at all. This though, give them a little candy and just get them off the trail, get them off the beaten path, or go the full other way. It's Trump is a Christo-fascist and we're going to start a new crusade. And if you get them going that way and give them an actual financial incentive without them knowing they're being bribed, but they are essentially being bribed, it's brilliant. I mean, hats off. Hats off to the boys at Langley or Fort Meade. I mean,
So Tommy, let me share another example that I learned about a couple weeks ago when I traveled to Rome that I'd never heard of before. Um, uh, the Italians are convinced that the CIA worked together with the Italian mafia to deploy during the 60s and 70s a an operation referred to as Blue Moon. And when we came back to the United States, we searched in the CIA document room where all the declassified documents are. And we searched US media and we could find nothing about Operation Blue Moon. But in the Italian media, it's fairly widely reported. So what is Operation Blue Moon? Okay. The thesis is that the CIA, together with the mafia, actively deployed subsidized cheap heroin into the dissident community in Italy as a way to maintain political power for the approved dominant party. And if you allow yourself to wander down that pathway, okay, that essentially they were able to corrupt and delegitimize the opposition by deploying an opioid selectively at a subsidized rate into the opposition community. Then you have to now look back in time at the strategy the British used to destroy Chinese culture, the Opium Wars. Another case of an opioid. Then fast forward to the present, and the question that has bedeviled me for years, why is the CIA protecting Afghan poppy farmers? Okay, that just doesn't seem to make any sense at all. And I've heard various rationalizations, but what if it was just because they needed to have a supply? Then you got to ask yourself the question, because heroin was not widely known until the 60s. Apparently, it was originally engineered by Bayer, the German chemical powerhouse. But it was not commonly available. People used opium, which is kind of the crude extract of poppy heads that have been abraded and then exude this plant based material that basically helps heal them, that is then collected and used to produce opium, this sticky substance. Heroin being the next iteration of that in terms of potency. Was this deployed against the anti-war protest movement? Why wouldn't it have been? It would be naive to think otherwise.
Absolutely, they would do that.
Um, and then take another step. What was the big life-changing event? This is just a tangent in Bobby Kennedy's life.
Heroin.
He got busted for heroin. It changed his life because part of the terms and conditions after he was convicted was that he had to do community service. What did he do community service on? Cleaning up the waterways. And that is what led him to Waterkeepers. That's what led him into his whole environmental lawyer position. He would not be the same person. And that in Mercury, in the waterways and the fisheries, is what led him into children's health defense. It all started because he got popped for using heroin by his own words as a way to
Study.
succeed better in school. Somehow, I have no idea, but taking heroin, somehow he felt was an appropriate study aid. I don't know how that works, but that's what he's claimed. Just like people taking meth to cram before they do an exam. So then you fast forward to the current present, and you clearly have weaponized fentanyl and fentanyl substrates being pumped in through the southern and northern border of the United States in order to destroy American culture by the Chinese. Of course, they're doing it. What would you expect them to do otherwise, right? And how much are we doing it to everybody else? The idea of addictive drugs as a basically a biowarfare strategy that exploits a particular human weakness, that is the opioid receptor, is profound. And it seems like this has been going on for centuries. And now with modern pharmacology, we're just seeing that it is able to be deployed more effectively and more cheaply. But it's still the same strategy. And of course, why wouldn't the Chinese do it? It's been done to them. And we're essentially surrogates for the British Empire. So from their standpoint, it's completely ethical. They did it to me, I could do it to them, eye for an eye. I think this whole space of weaponization of information and population control is fascinating to examine. And what, again, looping back, the underlying, if you stand back, let's go up to high altitude, look down on it. What we have is a situation in which it's increasingly normalized, or perhaps it's always been normalized, that the state has the right to manipulate the flock in almost the same way that the Catholic Church did for centuries throughout Europe. That it's okay for the bureaucratic state to use any resources at its disposal in order to manipulate behavior of the general populace. And once you go down that road, there's no turning back. That is a rabbit hole that goes everywhere.
As well as I was on Dr. Drew's show last week, and I brought up the book Weird Scenes Inside the Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, I think, by Dave McGowan, talking about
Okay.
like the Defense Intelligence Agency connections to essentially where the 60s movement was birthed. And was it, and the best way I can conclude is they took it and basically turned it into gain of function. They dialed it up because they knew they couldn't contain the crazy effects of acid. I mean, like metaphorically and literally, acid was dissolving like the nuclear structure of America. And if you can't beat it, the next best thing would be to just add so much fuel to it that people eventually reject it. And it starts as flower children, and it kind of ends with like heroin burnouts. And that's kind of his whole thesis, is all the weird ties between all of it. Um, but yeah, no, that is
Oh, and Drew is very focused on drug abuse. That's
yeah,
like
that's his
the
thing. Yeah,
core of his career is drug
yeah,
abuse.
and yeah, it makes like so once you just understand like drugs, Facebook, bot art, whatever, if you just zoom out and look at it, it is any method deemed necessary. I wouldn't even say necessary because anything is necessary to the people that want to run the world. Any method deemed
Effective.
energetically profitable.
Yeah.
I don't know, entropically favored. Like, why don't they just roll out tanks? Well, they can, but they've found out over the centuries like it's better to do it this way, and it's more effective, more
Cheaper,
faster,
faster,
better.
more
It's
effective,
yeah, replace
and
the
you don't
bomber
end
with a
up with
missile.
martyrs. Yeah.
Exactly.
No,
This is just the
yeah.
most modern form, and why wouldn't they? Why would you not? It doesn't make well, it makes it objectively wrong, but of course that's what you would do. And the same thing is, yeah, if you start seeing a bunch of independent podcasts or new that kind of are starting to replace the mainstream media, these islands of their own forms of integrity, that's really messing up your whole thing. You'd want to start tipping them over. Fascist, communist, pedophile, flat earther, thinks it's the Jews. Like that's what you would do. That's
Yeah.
exactly what you do. Is you start pushing over all the pillars. It's
And meanwhile, injecting your own surrogates into that same space.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And as you said earlier, I mean, and it is pretty simple. It's like, well, how do you counter this? All of this stuff, all manipulation, all, psychological temptation or deterrence or foggy middle ground. I mean, I know it sounds kind of like a Boy Scout, but it's pretty simple. Just do what you know is the right thing. And now,
Yeah.
granted, it's the least sexy answer, and I can tell you personally, it will absolutely eviscerate your podcast. Just doing the right thing. But if you just do the right thing, like you are kind of you can. It doesn't matter what people are saying. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep doing this.
It makes it so that you're more sustainable, I think.
Yeah, and it's kind of like if like right now, if right now I started getting that positive feedback bot army about something, like let's say I made a joke about it was the Jews, and I started getting a ton of. That's not something that I would continue to pursue. And if you tried to take it away, well, I've never had crazy views. I've never had crazy revenue, and I've kind of calloused myself to that. So there's nothing to take away. There is no opium that you can withdraw me from. I'm like, yeah, I've been doing this I've been booted from every platform. Like, there is no middle. You can't get to my scheduler. I am the scheduler. Like, like you can't turn someone near me. Like, it's me. And, because of that, I might be doomed to small room obscurity forever. But I like to think that it hardens you against like the waves. I just think of like waves hitting a huge oil tanker. Like it doesn't really budge that much. It just keeps going. And the oil tanker is not nearly as sexy as a big flashy yacht. But if your goal is to just kind of go true north and be your own thing, it is that you don't need I need an intelligence agency behind me. No, you don't. Just do what you know is the right thing. It's
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that
Well,
it's
and this gets down to uh, having a moral core.
yeah. Yeah, and well, what's the profitability of that? Well, that right there is you've already kind of raped the idea of it being moral. But I also think on a long enough timeline, I think having a moral core is actually the probably the best business move you can make. If you're just solid as a rock, that's something you can't fake. You can't. You can get botted likes on like tweets. You can't. You can't bot a legitimate reputation with people. Like I think having a moral core on a long enough timeline, and it seems to be very long, it is like the best thing you probably can do financially. Is because in 5 years from now, if somebody, God willing, my show gets big enough and I get character assassinated, I've had on enough people, I've had on enough guests. I think 99% of them would probably go to bat for me. And again, it's like it's like, so what's the secret behind all of it? Do the right thing. You know,
Yeah.
hard work is rewarded. It's not a sexy answer. It's not a fun answer. There's no cheat. There's no. It's just do the right thing, which I'm finding is not as common of a trait. What I thought was
Yeah.
like pretty normal. Yeah, do the right thing. You shouldn't want to hurt anybody. I'm now realizing I'm like, oh, that is essentially like being albino.
Well, and stay true to yourself.
Yeah.
When I decided to commit to social media and had that discussion with my wife, Jill, uh, what I said was Joe Rogan has built this enormous enterprise over years and years and years of just staying at it, just treating it like a business, day in, day out. It wasn't that he suddenly jumped to 10 or 100 million followers. No, he built that brick by brick by brick. And so that was our decision was, with Substack and otherwise, we treat it like a business. We treat our customers with respect. And we try to provide value on a daily basis, honesty, truth to the best of our ability, and to help them to better understand the world around them. And believing that this may not be a rocket ship to Mars, but it can create a sustainable business. And I'm surprised and pleasantly surprised that that's turned out to be the case. That
Mhm.
we have a lot of followers, only a tiny subset are subscribers. But that's enough. That's another thing that we get is why don't you do more to, get more paid subscribers? And I'm like, well, you know what? We have a decentralized subscriber base, which is fantastic because we're not beholden to anybody. And we get enough revenue. It has to do with not being greedy. I think that's another part of this ethic is we're not all going to be Rogan. Don't get greedy. Uh, and recognize that you're blessed with that support that you do have and that revenue that you have for doing this strange business of what's really an extended op-ed where we're just discussing the state of the world and how to make sense of it.
And I would say, lastly, maybe we'll wrap up with that. Is there is, I mean, really, there is a peace to knowing in your heart that you are doing the right thing. It doesn't matter if no one believes you. It doesn't matter if you're being slandered. When you know deep down, as Ram Dass would always say, moments at night where I would be alone in my bathtub and there were no one's eyes to look into to tell me how great I was. When you're by yourself and you go, yeah, no, I know I did the right thing. I feel I did the right thing. There is a truly a moment because one of the time you think that it's not going to just be in your bed, it's going to be on your deathbed. And that's
True.
a lot of how I think of it. I mean, seriously, if I'm like tossing and turning at night, sometimes I'll just kind of go over all the episodes I did, with you during COVID, and I'm like, no, I'm pretty proud of how straight I stood up, and it does kind of relax a bit, and you're like, that's cool, and you might say like, oh, that's gay. Yeah, I mean, there's a piece to
I
it.
had a I had a professional photographer come by 2 days ago here on the farm who had traveled from France. He's busy doing a compendium of images of people that said no during COVID. That's her thing, her shtick. And so she did the photo shoot with me over a couple of hours here on the farm. And she had a comment that I took to heart. Um, she said, "What comes across in my camera is that you have nothing to prove." And I think that's a kind of a nice place to be.
Mm.
Just being centered and confident in who you are, your truth, and not um, having an axe to grind, not pursuing a specific agenda. It may not be the best strategy for getting a pop on clicks, likes, and follows, but uh, just being centered and calm and having faith in yourself. I think there's a lot to that. I think that if we had more of that, we could get back to the initial, looping back to the starting of our conversation. If we had more people that were committed to being that way in the world, then I think it would be a lot easier for us as a nation and culture to solve problems efficiently, as opposed to allowing ourselves to be driven into warring camps and creating, a series of mini civil wars, which is what goes on now.
Nothing to prove and nothing to explain. There's no like, no, wait, officer, you're looking at it the wrong way. Like, nothing like that where you're in college and you and your friends are hammered and like we'd steal mailboxes and you're like desperately trying to, no, it looks bad. There's no, there's no like rapid hand waving and explanation. You're just like, oh yeah, no, this is the thing I do. And this is, you know why I pulled you over? Probably because I was going too fast. Yeah. I say that whenever I get pulled over, I say that. I always get let go. Why were you doing that? I was like, yeah, I thought I'd get away with it. They just look at me because in my mind I'm like, they've heard every excuse. Why
Yeah,
was I doing it? Let's be honest, because most of the time I don't get pulled over. It's there's nothing to explain. It's just like, yeah,
yeah.
this is the thing and it's
I think, Tommy, that this is a sign of maturity, of true maturity, is where you're comfortable in your own skin.
I think the internal peace is something though. That is the ultimate end goal though. Like let's walk it out. Like why wouldn't you do that to build the business? Well, why are you doing that? Either ego and or revenue. What are you doing with the revenue? Oh, I want to pay off all my bills. You pay off all your bills, have a good house, job security, health insurance. But what are all these things for? You're building up these fortifications and moats to rise to a point of peace. You just cut out the middleman. You still got to do all that other stuff. You still have bills. You still live in this world. You got to get food. But I mean, if the end goal is peace, that is what it is. What do you do after it all fades? You get the Lamborghini, the private jet. Oh, I'd like to just be, set for life. Why? Never have to work again. Why? It seems peaceful. You can. It's like
Oh, and the people that don't work are, in my experience, are
it sounds like hell on earth. To be
they
honest,
they they lose a purpose. They become unmoored.
that sounds awful. But I mean, if that's the end point, it's peace. After all the other, milestones of ego and praise and money and
Tommy,
all
I
that.
think you're a Taoist.
Maybe it might be. It might be. Maybe that's how the show ends. It's just me bald at a monastery up in the Himalayas. I
Speaking
think,
truth.
yeah, I think that's where this ends. Um, but for now, Dr. Malone, let's wrap this up. As always, total pleasure, and it always ends on a beautiful note. Um, but yeah, for everybody listening, in the description, all of your books. Last my government told me, was it Psy War? I think it's Psy War,
They
and then
were.
Psy Gay Good, Substack, podcast, Twitter, Getter, all that stuff is in there, and
And Parlor. Don't forget
Parlor.
Parlor.
Is it still? I didn't even know that was still up.
They have come back.
Interesting.
They're blockchain protected. You might want to think about
Yeah, I'll go over there.
getting in touch with Parlor and seeing about them hosting your podcast also.